Back at the cabin, the tension was shifting. Laura, unable to sleep, found herself drawn to the porch, where Jack was swinging precariously in the hammock. She watched him for a long moment. He looked so vulnerable in his sleep, his brow furrowed, as if even in his dreams he was trying to solve a problem that had no answer. She sat on the edge of the porch, the cold mountain air biting at her skin. "I just want one chance," she whispered to the darkness. "One commercial, one line, one moment where I'm not just waiting." She didn't notice the shadow in the bushes near the trail, the lush, green leaves that Jack would later find to be his undoing. She was too focused on the man she thought held the key to her life. Chapter 9. The Breaking Point. As the first grey light of dawn began to filter through the trees, the crucible finally cracked. Jack, having spent the night being bitten by every insect known to science and falling out of the hammock twice, finally retreated back into the cabin. He was a mess, his hair was a bird's nest, his flannel shirt was torn, and his eyes were bloodshot. When he returned, he found the scene had not improved. Furley had returned, his bucket filled with small, sour blueberries, looking like he'd gone 10 rounds with a bramble bush. Lana was awake, complaining that the mountain air was drying out her complexion, and Larry was frantically trying to hide a stack of director magazines he'd brought as props. Jack sought refuge in the icy stream. He stripped down and dove in, the cold shocking his system and waking him up just enough to realize the total absurdity of his situation. He was a man who wanted nothing more than a quiet life and a good soufflé, yet he was currently the centerpiece of a fraud, surrounded by people who wouldn't let him breathe. When he returned to the cabin, dripping wet and wrapped in a rough wool towel, he found Laura waiting for him on the porch. The early morning mist softened the edges of the shack, making it look almost romantic. "Use me, Jack," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of ambition and vulnerability. "In your next commercial, I'll do anything. I just want to be seen." Jack looked at her, and for the first time, he saw the real human cost of Larry's games. This wasn't just a sitcom misunderstanding. This was a woman's heart and future being dangled over a cliff for the sake of a weekend getaway. "Laura," Jack said, his voice soft and heavy with regret, "I'm not a director. I've never been to Japan. I don't know the first thing about commercials, other than I usually change the channel when they come on." The silence that followed was heavier than the mountain itself. "What?" Laura asked, her voice a tiny, broken thing. "I'm a chef," Jack repeated. "I work at a bistro. I'm a student. Larry just wanted to impress you. He thought if I was someone important, you'd think he was important too." The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. She turned toward the cabin, where Larry was visible through the window, trying to convince Lana that he was actually the one who discovered Jack. "You fraud," Laura hissed, storming inside. "You used my dreams to get me into a shack in the middle of nowhere? You let me hum jingles for a man who flips burgers?" "Laura, honey, wait, it was a misunderstanding," Larry stammered, his charm finally failing him. "I'm going back to town," she said, grabbing her bag with a finality that shook the floorboards. "And I'm never looking at a Big Bandito cigar again, as long as I live." Chapter 10. The Itch of Truth. The aftermath of the revelation was quiet and cold. Laura left, her heels clicking angrily on the dirt path until she vanished into the morning mist. Larry was relegated to the porch, while Janet and Chrissy huddled in their collapsed tent. Jack eventually found a spot on the floor, his head resting on a rolled-up sweater, but the mountains had one last trick up their sleeve. Earlier in the evening, in a desperate attempt to hide from Lana's increasingly aggressive advances, Jack had ducked into a thicket of lush, green leaves. At the time, they had seemed soft and welcoming. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange, the itching started. "Jack? Jackie boy?" Lana's voice trilled as she entered the cabin. "Time to wake up. I've got some cream for those blueberries Furley found. He says they're mountain caviar." Jack sat up, his face a map of red, angry welts. His arms were covered in blistering patches that burned like fire. Don't touch me. Don't even look at me." "Oh my God, Jack. What happened to your face?" Janet cried. "I think nature's masterpiece decided to paint a new portrait." Jack groaned. The leaves, Larry. Poison oak, Furley noted. Quite a nasty case. Reminds me of my third wife. She had a personality just like that. Irritating, spreads quickly, and leaves you scarred for weeks. The drive back to Santa Monica was a somber, itchy affair. Larry drove in silence, for once having nothing to say, while Jack scratched at his arms and wondered if he would ever feel clean again. Epilogue. The company of three. A few days later, the welts had faded into faint pink marks, and the rhythm of life in the apartment returned to its usual, chaotic harmony. "Come and knock on our door," Chrissy sang, dusting the television set. "We've been waiting for you." Jack walked into the living room, a spatula in hand. He looked at Larry, who was back to his usual self, already on the phone, trying to convince a different girl that he had connections in the music industry. He looked at Janet, who was carefully pruning a fern. He looked at Chrissy, who was trying to remember if she had actually dyed those shoes or if she had just dreamed it. He realized then that the mountain hadn't been a mistake. It was a reminder. "Larry," Jack said, his voice firm. "Yeah, buddy. Next time you want to go to a cabin, go alone. Or better yet, go to Japan. I hear you're big there." Jack smiled, flipped a pancake with a master's touch, and for the first time in a long time, he felt perfectly, wonderfully awake. The Company of Three, a novel of love, laughter, and life in Santa Monica. Chapter 1. The Golden Hour. The Santa Monica sun hung low over the Pacific, casting a long, amber glow across the shag-carpeted living room of apartment 201. For Jack Tripper, it was the hour of quiet chaos. He stood by the kitchenette, the scent of sea salt and cheap cologne clinging to the air, listening to the rhythmic sounds of a home that shouldn't, by any traditional standard, exist. Jack was a man of many secrets, but his greatest was the depth of affection he felt for the two women he shared this space with: Janet Wood, the sensible florist with eyes that saw through his every farce, and Chrissy Snow, the blonde whirlwind of innocence, who managed to make the most mundane sentence feel like a riddle. "Come and knock on our door." Jack hummed to himself, his voice a low baritone. He was a culinary student, a man of flavor and heat, yet here he was, playing the role of the platonic brother to keep the peace and to keep their landlord, the perpetually suspicious Mr. Furley, from throwing them out onto the street. "Hi, honeys, I'm home," Jack called out as he swung the door open, dropping his bag. The response was immediate and sharp. "Why didn't you knock first?" Janet's voice rang out from the kitchen, her brow furrowed over a steaming pot. Jack grinned, that crooked, boyish smirk that usually got him out of trouble. "Because we might not have been decent?" "Exactly." "It's all right," Jack teased, leaning against the counter. "I looked through the window first, to make sure." Janet rolled her eyes, but a small, affectionate smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Well, that's okay then. Here, Jack, as long as you're here, why don't you help Chrissy put up the new shower curtains? I need to get something out of the oven." Jack paused, sniffing the air. A peculiar, acrid scent was beginning to compete with the aroma of the evening breeze. "Hey, wait, when did you take up cooking?" "I haven't," Janet replied curtly, her face flushing. "I've got some underwear drying in there. Don't ask." Jack chuckled, a sound that died in his throat as he realized the domestic task ahead of him. Shower curtains. Right. The final frontier. Chapter 2. The farce in the bathroom. The bathroom was a cramped, tiled sanctuary where the steam usually smelled of lavender soap. Chrissy was already there, standing precariously on the edge of the porcelain tub, her blonde hair tied back in a messy bun. "Jack, just hand me the new curtain and then you can go, okay?" she said, her voice lilting with that signature sweetness. "No, Chrissy, I can't do that. You'll fall and break something, and Janet will blame me for the next 3 decades. I'll get it." He stepped into the small space, his shoulder brushing hers. There was a moment brief, electric, where the comedy of their lives faded, replaced by the simple reality of being young and close. But the moment was shattered by a sharp, rhythmic pounding on the front door. "Oh, hi, Mr. Furley." Janet's voice drifted from the living room. "It's nice to see you." Don't get your hopes up, came the gravelly, theatrical tone of Ralph Furley. This is not a social call. Today, I'm wearing my landlord hat, and I want to see the man of the house, unless he's busy painting his toenails.